Hello, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning from wherever you are listening to, wherever you are joining us. Very warm welcome to you all. And I'm glad that you are joining us today on this very important topic of climate emergency, climate challenge, climate crisis, but I would call it climate opportunity. Wherever you are joining us from, please engage, listen, and on your own windows, chat to us, post comments, and you will have an opportunity to ask questions to our panelists as well. Currently, we are in the middle of the biggest disruption to global economy since the Great Depression and World War II due to COVID-19. We are overusing our Earth's most important assets by 1.6 times. Earth Overshoot Day marks the date when humanity's demand for ecological resources and services in a given year exceed what Earth can generate in a year. This year, Earth Overshoot Day was on August 27 days, just 2 days ago. That means by August 22nd, we have used Earth's natural resources on our planet that it can be regenerated. And from yesterday, we are running on borrowed assets and borrowed resources, creating a deficit in planet Earth's account books. COVID has brought extraordinary impact to people's lives, health. Being a virologist, I would say we are living in a society where what happens in India, what happens in Melbourne, what happens in China, USA, or Scotland is all interconnected. We are living in a global society where what air we breathe, what resources we utilize in one part of the world impacts others. That is why we cannot say we are only limiting our efforts and our impacts to where we live. We have to think globally and we have to come together about the greatest chance. Impact of COVID-19 has been slightly positive on our climate challenge. The Earth Overshoot Day was brought back by full 3.5 weeks. Last year in 2019, on 29th July, it was the earliest Earth Overshoot Day. Like within first 6 months, we had utilized all the resources that the Earth could regenerate for that year, and based on the number of people. This year, because the COVID-19 brought down our activities to virtually standstill, biggest disruption to economy, travel stopped, hospitality, retail. But as a result, we have regained some time, but this is not a long-term solution. We need to do something about it in better terms where we bring our heads together and think, what is the long-term solution? Humanity's demands on nature continues to exceed what Earth can generate. But does it have to be like that? Can we not think of some alternative measures, alternative ways of how we utilize, how we live, and how we sustain? What are we going to do about, before COVID hit, climate challenge was the biggest topic of discussion, because what is the legacy that we are going to leave to our future generations? Younger generation, even today's audience, among them, they engage and they are very worried about planet and its resources. And this is our gift and our legacy to future generations. We owe it to them. So what is our tendencies to overuse and capture what we can gain? We have to change that. But what are we going to do build a resilient, healthy, sustainable green economy? So we must decide what to do and how is it possible to save the world and turn this climate emergency or climate challenge into a climate opportunity. And tonight, I'm happy that we have a splendid panel with us where we could talk on these important discussions. Next year, the eyes of the world will be on Scotland as world leaders gather here for the COP26. We were going to have COP26 this year in Glasgow, but because of COVID, now we have moved it to next year. But this has given us an opportunity to think, to get our plans, thoughts, and act together for the next year so that we can put Glasgow, we can put Scotland on the world map and present our innovative thoughts and ideas. The science is clear on the scale of challenge and the urgency to act. And tonight, we will hear from the founder of Earth Overshoot Day model. And I'm really so pleased to have you here with us, Mathis Wagernagel, who is the Global Footprint Network's founder. And we'll also have Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, which is the regulatory body of Scotland's and for environment, Chief Executive Terry Ahern. And as well as we have Scotland's 5 major political parties representative here. And most importantly, I'm pleased that all of you who are joining us from various places at home. Scotland has a vision for global environmental leadership and a great story to tell. And tonight, I'm delighted to welcome Gillian Martin, MSP from Scottish National Party, Maurice Golden, MSP from Scottish Conservative Party, Colin Smythe, MSP representing from Scottish Labour Party, Mark Rescal, MSP from Scottish Greens, and Katie Gordon from Scottish Liberal Democrat. In a moment, we'll hear from Mathis, but before that, please make sure that you check out our live polls. All the audience, you are at home, and even panelists. You can check out the live poll on tonight's webinar and on your screens. Ask your questions, share your views, and on the social media, let's get it trending. Use Move the Date. Okay, so now over to Terry, but prior to that, let me introduce you, Terry, through Mathis. Mathis Wagernagel is co-creator of the Ecological Footprint and president of the Global Footprint Network. At SEPA, really excited to work with Global Footprint Network on this important topic. Mathis completed his PhD in Community and Regional Planning from British Columbia University. Mathis has worked on sustainability with governments, corporations, international NGOs on 6 continents and has lectured in more than 100 universities. He's advised governments, has previously served as the Director of Sustainability Program at Redefining Progress in Oakland, California, and has authored numerous papers and articles. Over to you, Mathis. We'd like to hear your thoughts on this important topic.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pudam. It's just a delight to be with you, and thank you for taking the time, all representatives from the Scottish Parliament. It's an honor to be with you and enjoy to discuss this important topic. As Dr. Pudam said, we marked Earth Overshoot Day we launched it from Glasgow because Glasgow is the focal point for the human discussion on climate change, one of the big pressures on the planet. What I'm showing you now is how New York, how the New York Times represented Earth Overshoot Day. For the urbanites, they can think more probably in cell phones. That's how the cell phone is running out. But how do we actually know when Earth Overshoot Day is? It's quite simple. We start from the recognition that we have one planet. That's not so hard to understand. And if you look at maps, about 24% or about a quarter of the surface of the planet is ecologically productive. That's where most of the regeneration happens. Trees grow, plants grow, fish regrow, etc. Now that's like our budget. That's our farm. That's how much we have available. What we use, we call the ecological footprint. That's the other side. For my orange juice, I needed space. For my potato, for my milk, for the fiber of my shirt, for absorbing the CO2 from fossil fuel burning, all that uses space. And so we can add up that space. It's very simple. And then we get a ratio. So how much do we have? So if you take the planet and split it up by how many people we have per person, we have about 1.6 hectares of ecologically productive space. If we compare that with how much we actually use, there's quite a bit of a difference. We use 2.5 on average, and about 4 in the UK, but 2.5 on average. And so you can see that's more than what we have. How is that possible? It's like with money. We can spend more than what we earn. We can spend more nature than is being regenerated by adding CO2 to the atmosphere, by cutting down trees more rapidly than they regrow, by fishing more quickly, by depleting fresh water, etc. So it's possible to use more, and indeed we do use more. So we can then look at that ratio. It's like if you spend your money 60% faster than what you earn, like your budget would be used up earlier in the year. By August 22nd, actually, if you also spend your money 60% faster. And that's why Earth Overshoot Day is August 22nd. But that's kind of the smaller part of Earth Overshoot Day, because the real important part is move the date. The question is not whether we will get out of overshoot, but how. So we distinguish between moving out of overshoot by disaster or by design. And so the push that we got from COVID-19 wasn't a good choice. It was just, it was imposed on us, and it led to a lot of suffering. So there's not that much to celebrate that Earth Overshoot Day is later, because we haven't systemically improved the world. We still have the same energy systems, etc. So the question is, how can we do that? And actually, the even more important point is to say it's to our own benefit. I think that's the big that we think it's a nice thing to do for humanity, but what's in it for me? But it actually is exactly the opposite. It's much more like we are in a boat. It's called our country. It's our boat. And there's a big storm coming. We can actually see the storm quite well. And then why would we say we are not fixing our own boat until everybody else is fixing their boat? And the reason we have chosen to launch in Scotland is because Scotland is quite unique in that way. It recognizes that it's on a boat and there's a storm coming. And it's one of the most advanced regions in terms of saying we need to prepare for the future we can anticipate. We need to decarbonize. We need to make our economy prepared so we can operate well in the future we come. And I think that's kind of the key lesson, that investing in yourself, it's a bit like COVID. What is the best thing you can do around COVID? The best thing you can do is to protect yourself, to protect society. And the same thing is true for climate and resources. The more you are ready, the more you are prepared, the more you are prepared. It's absolutely an essential investment in your ability to operate not just now, but in the long run. So that's why I'm so excited to be with you and discuss the possibilities and opportunities that arise from what SEPA calls one planet prosperity, because the insight is very simple. One planet, that will stay. So the only choice is between one planet prosperity and one planet misery. And so that's why I'm so excited to see that Scotland says, yes, the choice is easy. Let's build one planet prosperity. And that's the whole idea of Earth Overshoot Day.
Thank you, Mathis. That was excellent ground to build our discussion on. And thank you for raising that one planet prosperity idea, because as you say, we only have this planet to live on. And if we utilize, it's up to us to utilize it wisely, or to see the consequences. As one of the consequences we are in the middle of rightly in the health crisis. Similarly, we don't want to combine it with an ecological one, which is already looming large on us. So now I would like to invite Terry for introduction, because Terry is Chief Executive of Scotland's environmental watchdog, or the regulatory body of Scottish Environment Protection Agency. And if I say Scotland is very innovative and quite unique in that, and in this case, SEPA has taken this innovative step of moving from purely regulatory front to taking on the challenge of innovation to see what we can do in environmental aspect, and working with national economic agencies and other partners in Scotland. Terry is, as you will hear once he starts speaking, is native to Australia, and has worked with across the world in environmental protection area in London, in Brussels. But yes, wow, what brings Terry you all the way from Australia to sort out the and work in Scotland? I'm sure it is the wonderful Scottish weather. Welcome to you, Terry.
Thank you very much. So if you think about what we need to do in response to what Mathis just described, if Mathis and his team had said Earth Overshoot Day was the 22nd of December, not the 22nd of August, what we would all know is we just need to do business as usual a little bit better. Because if you're only missing by 9 days, you just need to improve a little bit out of 365. But that's not the story. The evidence says the 22nd of August. And as we heard last year, it was the 29th of July. Unfortunately, it's moved in the right direction for the wrong reason. That means, because that's the combination of everything humanity does, all of humanity and every organisation that exists needs to do business as unusual. That needs to become everything we do. And I've got a test for this, which I'll apply to SEPA, which is you need to surprise the people you work with. So let me explain how that will work. If we go to a business we regulate and say, we are going to vary your permit to make you spend more money on pollution control equipment, that does not surprise them. If we say to them, we are going to prosecute you as long as they have badly polluted, that won't surprise them. We should do those things. That's a critical part of our role. If we go to a business we regulate and say, we want to help you create more jobs, they say, what? And we say, the only way you'll create jobs that will last will be if you decarbonise, dematerialise your production. And not just here at your factory, through your whole supply chain. And your whole supply chain will almost certainly be global. They're surprised. And then we say, but we're not just going to tell you what you need to do. There's a huge problem in environmental improvements through supply chains. That's sometimes the revenue will fall to one business in a supply chain or one sector in a supply chain, and the cost will fall somewhere else. So you've got to have an ability through a supply chain to share risk and return. And as your regulator, we have a new tool called, and another tool called sector plans, where we'll help you do that. That shocks and surprises the businesses we regulate. So a practical example, the whisky industry, 94% compliance in the last year that the records were done. That's the highest sector for compliance with Scotland's environment protection laws. But they are also looking at way beyond compliance. So if you take one example, whisky is a premium product, very impressive bottles, but they're heavy, so there's a fair bit of energy in their production, and there's a fair bit of energy when you ship them around the world, including to the country I come from. So that industry is stepping up and saying, well, how do we work to lightweight the bottles in a way that you keep the premium look so that they will have the same market attraction? That's one of the many innovations that needs to happen right through supply chains around the world. Now, the exciting thing is Scotland, and I know this as an outsider, was one of the heartlands of the Industrial Revolution, the Scientific Revolution, the Enlightenment, punching way above its weight. We have that opportunity to do that sort of exciting innovation now. So these challenges, as has been said, they're exciting, they need to happen. For a regulator, what we will do, and I've just talked to Ian Buchanan earlier before this call about our compliance work and our regulatory work in the next 6 months. And I put it in these perhaps Australian terms, said, right, we're going to check a few thousand people. We're coming out of COVID. We've been doing some compliance checking. We have the ability carefully under the rules to protect our staff and others to get out there more. We've picked the few thousand sites that we'll be inspecting. So we'll be checking some people. We've got some compliance and enforcement blitzes we'll have. So we'll be whacking some people, those people who deserve it. You know, we're at 1.6 planets. We cannot afford to have people who can't even meet the minimum laws. And as a regulator, if they want a whack, we'll give them a whack. And then we will help some people. So we hope to sign another 5 or 6 sustainable growth agreements. We already have several in the Leven with 14 different organisations, the Coal Authority, Fife Council, Diageo, Keep Scotland Beautiful, all those people and organisations trying to make that part of Scotland one of the heartlands of the low carbon industrial revolution that's coming. So there's a huge opportunity for every organisation to create a different future. And as I say, I think the test is, if you're not surprising people every day by what you do, you must still be doing business as usual. And business as usual ain't going to get us out of this crisis. It's business as unusual that will create a different and better future. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Terry. A very strong message from Scottish Environment Protection Agency, and a positive looking message for the businesses and the organizations that want to work progressively with positive steps towards improving their carbon emissions. So certainly look out for the website and the messages for those tools. Across tonight, we are really keen to hear from you who are attending from your home, from various places, to see what are your thoughts and how are we going to move fast? Because for next year, for COP26, eyes will be on Glasgow, and we want to put Scotland on the world map for that. But before that, we'll start by hearing from some of the political party representatives here about their vision and about how we deliver one planet prosperity that both Mathis and Terry talked about Scotland, and how we move the date for the Earth Overshoot Day so we start to use less consumption or start to replenish the resources and assets that we are borrowing and using. Because literally from yesterday, we are in a borrowing phase and it's red for the account books of planet Earth. So reflecting the size of the current parliamentary groups, we'll go to Gillian Martin, MSP first. Gillian, welcome here. And now it's important to say that you are here in your capacity as not representing the Scottish government, but as representing a member of the SNP, and for speaking here on an area that's very close to your heart as convener of the Parliament's Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee. So can I ask you, Gillian, what does one planet prosperity mean to you, and what is your party's vision for helping to move the date?
Well, I guess, first of all, one planet really means me human rights. And I think at the heart of tackling climate change is justice, equalities, and human rights. And if we place that at the heart of everything we do, we will get there. If we don't, we'll end up causing great heartache to a lot of people. I first of all wanted to say that one of the things that really struck me as COVID-19 broke, I saw a cartoon which crystallized it for me. It was online from a foreign newspaper, and it was a boxing ring, and the earth was being pummeled by an opponent which had COVID-19 written on it. But outside the ring, there was a much beefier, more muscly, more menacing character waiting to take its turn pummeling Earth, and it was called climate change. And I think one of the things is about this situation that we're in right now is, yes, the Earth Overshoot Day has lit forward because there have been some emissions gains made as a result of this terrible pandemic that we're going through. But we can't overestimate them, because the potential for us to completely go in the opposite direction as we try to feverishly get our economy back on track could mean that we don't just go back to old habits, but we create even worse habits. So we have to have at the centre of this about the human rights of the people that we're the economy that we are trying to create. And as we do that, we need to recognise that at the moment, there are an awful lot of people who are reliant on jobs which are heavily carbon-laden jobs. None more so in my area of Scotland, which is the northeast. I come from the northeast, and the amount of people that are reliant on the oil and gas industry, not just even directly employed by it, but also tangentially and down the service economy, is massive. It was interesting what Terry said, because around there's certain sort of sticks you can beat people with, but there's actually far better things to begin by incentivizing people to do the right thing, and to put it in terms that it's actually going to be better for the economy if we create carbon neutral jobs, low emissions jobs. But in order to do that, we need to recognise that we have to skill our people. And that's at the very heart of the green recovery that the SNP, Scottish Government, are proposing. A green recovery which actually puts money into reskilling people that are already reliant on the sort of jobs that at the moment are causing us problems with regards to our emissions, and giving them a route out to sustainable employment, and not being put in the scrap heap like so many people were in the 1970s and 80s, actually having a just transition, but also recognising that the young people need to be given the type of skills which are going to be for future jobs. Jobs in energy should be for low carbon energy like hydrogen, but also recognising as us as a country and as an economy, if we don't do this, we'll be yesterday's man. We'll be the Kodak when everyone else has gone digital. And we have the potential to be a big supplier of hydrogen throughout Europe. And we need to grasp that with both hands. But that's going to take money to invest in projects which build our capacity in terms of skills and innovation. Scottish Government has been reacting to the COVID crisis in a great many ways, but it's also been reacting to the just transition around this, the green recovery. There's been 5.5 million put into renewables projects. There's been low carbon infrastructure transition funding. There's been community renewables, energy schemes funding. There's been hydrogen accelerators put in place in St Andrews, and there's been, in my area, there's been money put into the transition training, which is at the heart of that transition of that high carbon economy to future sustainable jobs. And that's, I think, from my point of view, and I'm not speaking from the perspective of the government, but certainly that's what I've been pressing for as a North East MSP, for my party to put its focus onto young people and skills, because if we have young people and skills, we'll be able to we'll be able to take the opportunities that we have as we meet our climate change goals as well. And what we can't do is react to the economic disaster in a way that forgets about that other guy outside the boxing ring who is sent to pummel us like we've never been pummeled before, and will make COVID-19 look like a holiday. So that's my general thoughts. I don't know whether I've gone over my time or not. I'm sure you'll tell me, but certainly we have to take what's the positive things, perhaps around the way we've been working throughout this pandemic, and keep them and not revert back. A lot of that can be done by incentivisation. Not much of that can be done by legislation.
Thank you very much for that, Gillian. Quite a few points in there, and I'm sure, as you said, representing Aberdeenshire east of that, currently in second lockdown, I'm sure that the inside the ring is also looking, but we need to focus on the agenda of today's to see what the skills that you mentioned that we need to develop and the green economy that you need to bring. Okay, so I would now like to invite Maurice Golden. Maurice, welcome. You are the Scottish Conservative MSP for West of Scotland region. And you're also shadow secretary for economy. And I know
Hello, thank you for that. I think it maybe slightly broke up there, but I just really wanted to reflect upon the scale of the problem we face, echoing some earlier remarks, but also look at the solution as well. And I think climate change is one of the greatest challenges of our time. I visited Nepal last year, which is one of the smallest contributors globally to emissions, yet it'll be hardest hit as a result of climate change through a host of ecosystem degradation to flooding as well as drought. And we're seeing this all over with our overheating planet already losing a staggering 28 million tons of ice from its ice sheets and glaciers, triggering sea level rises and accelerating at a rate that's beyond the worst case scenario predicted by the IPCC. You're also reflecting on the recent heat wave in Siberia, which brought forest fires, permafrost melting, and pest invasions in its wake. And such an event would have been impossible in a world with limited pre-industrials of carbon dioxide in its atmosphere. Added to that, you've got the Amazon rainforest with 17% already lost. And when it reaches, if it were to reach 25%, there wouldn't be enough trees cycling moisture through the rainforest. Added to that, we have species loss accelerating at a rate of tens of hundreds of times faster than in the past, and more than 500,000 species will be lost or have insufficient habitat for long-term survival. In our oceans, there could be more plastic in the sea by weight than fish by 2050. So the scale of the challenge is immense, but the solution, well, we're all part of that. And I think a large part of that solution is by employing policies that support the circular economy. And to use an analogy, a circular economy is an economic system whereby resources are circled around the system in its highest value state for as possible. And thinking about the world as a car hurtling towards the edge of a cliff, that is our current linear economic model, where we take resources and throw them away very quickly, sometimes without even using them. Now, if we just did things a little bit better, use the same current economic model, the car would slow down, but it would eventually reach the cliff and fall off. But if we use circular economy policies, then we can turn the car around and stop it from ever reaching that cliff. So a few quick examples. In terms of businesses, they need to look at how they secure their supply chains, become more resilient, design out waste, look at product design as well as system design. They also need to change this model. So Philips is a good example, who instead of selling light bulbs, they now also sell light in a paper lux model, because they're the experts. And by effectively employing a rental model for light, it's a lot more effective for the environment. Or Circos, which is a subscription service for children's clothes, so that mothers and fathers don't need to buy clothes throughout the child's development, which quickly become redundant as the child outgrows them. So they actually offer a rental model for that. But for consumers, I don't think it should be characterized as consuming less, but consuming better. So, for example, the average power drill sold in the United Kingdom is used for 12 or 13 minutes for an entire lifetime. It is very simple. The next time you need a hole in the wall, rather than buying a power drill, you should simply be able to borrow or rent one, or at the very least acquire a pre-used version. Now, all of us sitting at homes probably have about a third of the clothes in their wardrobe that they haven't used in the last year. That's a massive waste. It's estimated to be worth around £1,000 per household, £30 billion in total, and yet 336,000 tonnes of clothes gets thrown in the bin in the UK every year. So there's lots we can do on food. We could save an average per household of about £460 by storing food correctly, by making a shopping list, by using leftovers. So consumers and businesses have a role to play, but so do politicians. And I think we've achieved some things, which is great. I think there's a wide recognition of the problem. And certainly in Scotland, the UK, and many other nations around the world, there's targets to help achieve and solve the problem. But perhaps the third step is the most difficult step, and that's action. And I think that's what we require from politicians and through agencies in order to actually begin reducing our emissions, transitioning in a fair manner to a low carbon society. And that's the challenge for all us politicians on the call, as well as everyone else out there. The time now is for action.
Thank you for that, Morris. It certainly is. If I were to take the last point, you have mentioned some practical aspects of it that people should do, and it was good to hear the role of businesses, governments, and public to work together. And now moving on to Colin Smythe, welcome here, and MSP representing Scottish Labour. So hello, Colin, and you are MSP from South of Scotland region, Shadow Cabinet Secretary for Rural Economy, Transport and Connectivity. So my question to you for tonight is, what's Labour's agenda around One Planet Prosperity and around moving the date, and what are your thoughts and plans for that?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Malik, and a big thank you to SEPA for the invitation, and along with the Global Footprint Network for hosting tonight's event, which I think I'm right in saying is probably the first entirely virtual Scottish Parliament reception. And I suppose there's an irony in that as we come together to mark Earth Overshoot Day, events such as this are taking place virtually due to circumstances, sadly, the tragic pandemic we're all still battling. In so-called normal times, many of us would have probably been travelling into the centre of Edinburgh through some of Scotland's most congested streets to visit the Parliament, to physically attend a parliamentary event this evening. And few of us probably would have given the idea of a totally virtual event a second thought. Yet over the last few months, home working, virtual meetings, forced as they may be by the current pandemic, have become almost second nature. And that's one of the reasons why this year's Earth Overshoot Day is more than 3 weeks later. I suppose the big challenge now is, how do we stop a shift back as we begin that movement out of the current lockdown? We're already seeing pressure, for example, from businesses urging the government to reopen non-essential offices to boost the economy in our town and city centres. And that's understandable in the face of the unemployment tsunami that's battering us at this moment. And it's how we respond to that type of potential conflict that will be so important if we are going to be serious about building back better. At this moment in time, the constituents contacting me are worried about their jobs. They're worried about their loved ones in care homes being safe. In fact, I had one constituent on the phone on Friday. He's 22, he doesn't have a car, and he's been struggling because the bus service that gets him home from work in the evening was cut during the pandemic. It hasn't been reinstated, and he's worried that it never will be. And I wrote down a very telling quote when he said, "I saw your leader, Richard Leonard, on the telly talking about investment in green buses." And the constituent said to me, "Look, I didn't care if it was a green bus, a red bus, or a yellow bus. What I want is a bus to get me home from work." And I suppose in the months ahead, the big challenge is to make sure, how do we mainstream our response to the climate crisis to meet the challenges that our constituents like him are facing? We have to show those constituents it isn't something that we have to do, as well as tackling the current economic crisis. Dealing with the climate crisis is something that is part of the solution to that economic crisis. I think, Dr. Malik, you said it's not just a climate crisis, it's a climate opportunity. And I think Mathis described it as fixing our boat. And you're absolutely correct. It is an opportunity. It is something we have to do. And it's part of the solution to those economic challenges that we face. For my own part, my own party are absolutely determined to put our Green New Deal at the very heart of our commitments over the next few months as we head towards the next Scottish Parliament election. A couple of examples: building more council homes each year to the highest energy efficiency standards, but also improving all of Scotland's homes so that we can deliver zero carbon in those properties by 2045. It's good for the environment, but crucially, it's good for keeping people's household bills down. Meeting 200% of our own electricity needs by 2030 through renewable energy production, but also creating a Scottish National Energy Development Agency to coordinate that work So we don't just have the energy we need, but we have the employment dividend as well. So again, good for the environment, but also good for jobs, tackling what is a justifiable criticism from many of our communities who see the wind turbines on the landscape, but they don't see the jobs in the community, particularly in manufacturing, that they should be creating. And two final areas, particularly close to my heart as my party's spokesperson, they just happen to be the most polluting sectors, transport and agriculture. So key priorities that we want to see as a party is investing in those green buses that my constituent wasn't too excited about, but also setting up new municipal bus companies so we have those local services he needs, and also free bus travel for under 25s as a first step towards a long-term aspiration of free travel. And when it comes to agriculture, as we leave the common agricultural policy, we have to reform our rural support system so we properly incentivise the environmental changes we need to make. Now, Dr. Malik, I appreciate that if I was in the Scottish Parliament just now, I think the presiding officer would be telling me to finish up before he or she cut me off. So I just want to finish on this point. I'm proud that the Scottish Parliament has passed some groundbreaking climate change targets, and I'm proud that my party wants to go further, quicker. But as Maurice said, there is a recognition of the problem, but the real challenge is to make sure that the law, the policy, the public investment, our agencies are focused on the solutions, the measures we need to deliver those targets in the work they do every day, that we create the context that facilitates and supports greener choices, and we build public support and buy-in for those choices, showing people that building back better for our economy and quality of life has environmental justice, global leadership, and a greener Scotland very much at its heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. There was a lot in there to take. And on your point, yes, it is right that we make solutions available to people, but at it make it wide stream, broad stream, so that there is a lot of question about behavioral change in people adopting greener solution as routine solutions and not something that is digging deep in the topic. And while we are on the topic of that, yes, I was happy to see that the Earth Overshoot Day was widely adopted by Scottish Parliament. So absolutely, I think while there have been challenges on the COVID front, events like this, where we are not adding to the carbon emissions and holding these virtually while in a challenging environment, is a step forward. So let me bring in now Mark Ruskell, MSP, Scottish Greens. Welcome, Mark. And you are Scottish MSP, Green MSP for Mid-Scotland and Fife region, my own home region. So you're also a spokesperson for climate, energy, environment, and food and farming. So can I ask you, Maurice, what are your views in terms of how far we have come and where we need to go next, as well as in terms of building one planet prosperity, and thoughts on how do we tackle this, move the date?
Well, thanks very much for inviting me here tonight. And, I've been doing a number of these events over the last couple of months, and I think there's a real public awareness and a real interest in how we do build back better. I think we've got a critical time at the moment, a critical window of opportunity to reflect on the COVID crisis and reflect on some of the challenges that we faced during that time, but also some of the solutions that the crisis has allowed us to think through. And really the time that we've got available is incredibly short here, because we only have 10 years to tackle the climate crisis and make massive cuts in emissions across our society. So the need for governments to react and react fast is definitely here. And I think in many ways the COVID crisis has been a bit of a dress rehearsal for some of the challenges that we're going to face with climate change. It also, I think, has demonstrated some truths about our economy and the lack of resilience within our economy as well. And I think Colin touched on some of those points. It's also shown how governments can respond in a time of crisis. And I think, that various organisations now are pushing the concept of a Scottish Green New Deal. In the Greens last year, we came out with our own contribution. It's great to see Labour and Commonweal and others now talking about the critical role of the state, an interventionist role of the state in designing and supporting the solutions that we need. In terms of Earth Overshoot Day, I mean, it's obviously a great tangible way to understand what we're doing to the world and our overconsumption of resources. But we need to delve a little bit further and look at some of the huge inequalities that exist around the world. I mean, when the governments of the world come to Glasgow next year, I'm sure at some point Malawi will sit on the same table as the UK. But the footprint of Malawi, the global footprint of Malawi, is 10 times smaller than Scotland and the UK. So, we need to get to grips with global inequality, and we need to allow countries like Malawi the room to breathe and to follow their own development path. I think for me, though, one of the strongest reflections from COVID is that economic growth, that central purpose that governments have, GDP growth really has to go. It's not an appropriate measure. It's not an appropriate goal for governments anymore, because it's quite clear that it's not delivering fairness within our societies. It's certainly not delivering fairness between societies, and it's blowing our ecological limits. I mean, we're already blown our limit for this year on the 22nd of August. And while it's true that economic growth has delivered some well-being in our economies in the past, it's quite clear now that we're spending more and more money in our economies actually fixing some of the problems, fixing the inequalities and unemployment and vulnerable work and the impacts of that and poverty in our economy, but also having to spend money fixing climate change, fixing pollution and environmental degradation. And I think we need to repurpose the economy. We need an economy as if people mattered, an economy which serves society rather than the other way around, and an economy and a society which exists within the natural boundaries and limits of the planet that we live in. And in many ways, if we're working within the boundaries, within the limits of our planet, that's not necessarily going to restrict our personal freedoms, but what it is going to do is drive innovation and drive creativity, human creativity. So there are great opportunities there for us to move forward as a society. And there are many countries now that are talking about well-being economies. But what I'd really like to see is the Scottish Government change its central purpose of its economic strategy and government from sustainable economic growth, which is still a form of economic growth, to developing a real well-being economy and actually get the metrics right for what we're trying to achieve. And of course, organizations like SEPA, like Scottish Enterprise as well, also have this sole objective of sustainable economic growth. So we really need to not just move the date, but we need to change the objective here as well. What does this mean for communities? Well, I think, Gillian talked very passionately, as she always does, about the impact of oil and gas on her own family, but also on the region that she represents as well. And it's important that we take communities with us in this transition. But I think by realizing that there are limits, we can start to prepare for that just transition and start to prepare for the jobs and the new industries in the economy. So in New Zealand, for example, the New Zealand government there has decided to not allow any more licenses for the extraction for oil and gas. That doesn't mean the oil and gas industry shuts down tomorrow, by the way. It will keep going for another 10, 15 years, but it does enable an endpoint for that industry to be chosen, and it enables the government to work with unions and with communities to put in place an economic strategy for regions in New Zealand to enable a life beyond oil and gas and to enable jobs to come on the back of that. And I think critical to that then is a Green New Deal approach. It's about recognizing that key interventionist role of the state, and it's about ensuring that the state takes a role in terms of driving that innovation with a key objective of tackling the climate emergency, but also a key objective of tackling poverty and inequality and unemployment. It's about the state not just fixing markets, but creating entirely new markets for goods and services that we're going to need going forward to tackle the climate emergency and meet those social objectives. And we've got a good record in Scotland of having done that in the past. We had a first amazing renewables revolution in the 1960s where we built hydropower schemes in the Highlands. And that was done by the state. So I think a Green New Deal approach that harnesses the power of the state, but also recognises that we need a regional industrial strategy for each area of Scotland, and particularly those communities who've been dependent on jobs, which are going to need to change going forward to create new jobs for the future. So I look forward to the questions and more discussion about what that looks like.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks very much for highlighting that about pointing out about the Green Deal, but as well as the role of state in creating alternative new systems, and also Scotland's innovative position and leadership in the area of moving towards green economy. So last but not the least, our final panelist here is Katie Gordon, representing Scottish Liberal Democrats. Welcome, Katie. And so you are a Liberal Democrat spokesperson for Economy and Fair Works. Now, you've been listening to four party colleagues, and so what is your take and thoughts on what you've heard so far, and what's the Scottish Liberal Democrats' view and vision for the One Planet prosperity, and how do you suggest that we move the date forward collectively? Okay. Hi. Sorry about that. I think, Katie, your mic is muted, so we couldn't hear you. Really apologies for that. And I hope if you can unmute yourself and come back again, because I'm sure I could see the passion in your thoughts, but unfortunately, we were not able to hear. So are you able to unmute yourself?
I was determinedly not going to butt in on anyone else. So it has been very interesting to listen to what everyone else has been saying. And I'm not going to spend my time talking about what they've all said, but it's clear that everybody does have a real commitment to moving the date. And as Liberal Democrats, we are no different to that. I do think Scotland has a great story to tell. But we are doing well on many fronts, such as renewable electricity and earlier targets to achieve net zero. But if we're talking about living within our means, then we still have some of the most inefficient housing stock in Europe, much of which relies on fossil fuels like gas. We still aren't taking responsibility for the waste we create, because offshoring is easier than building our own capacity. And we risk not getting the full benefits of the green energy revolution with work that could be done in Scotland going overseas instead. Basically, we should be aiming for a circular economy, which minimises the use of natural resources by reusing the goods and materials that they're made from. But we do also need to focus on the big polluters. So if you think about it, how do we persuade people to insulate their homes when they can look out their windows and see Mossmoran Chemical Works in Fife flaming gas for weeks on end? Scotland should be leading the world in tackling the climate emergency. We know our planet is on the brink of being irreparably damaged. Some might say it already is there. But we are the last generation with a chance of doing something about it before it's too late. But nothing is going to be easy. The quick wins and the low-hanging fruit have already been grabbed. And what comes next is going to need much greater effort, more difficult choices, and increased resources. The Liberal Democrats have consistently forced the pace in countering these threats, from establishing the first ever renewable electricity targets with Ross Finney to setting up the Green Investment Bank through Vince Cable. And today we're leading the fight to rid our seas of plastic, introduce a levy on disposable coffee cups, make our homes warmer by promoting cost-saving energy-efficient measures. So there was a recent report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which said that on current trajectories, we could exceed 1.5 degrees by 2030. Scottish Liberal Democrats have already been working hard to ensure this doesn't happen, and we know the key time is now. The next 10 years are the most crucial. Thanks to our Labour and Liberal Democrat amendment to the Climate Change Bill, Scotland now has a target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 75% by 2030, and this is one of the strongest in the world. But to meet this target, we have to reduce our emissions by a further 28.2%. That is really going to need a coherent and thought through plan. And that, we think, is best served by Liberal Democrats in government. Under our plans, we want to virtually eliminate demand for oil and gas for heating, power and transport. We want to decarbonise the power sector completely, supporting renewables and household and community energy to create jobs and cut fossil fuel imports. Everybody should be able to afford to heat their home so it's warm enough for them to live in. Poor insulation and heat loss contribute to climate change and cause ill health and early deaths. Under our plans, we would launch an emergency 10-year programme to reduce energy consumption from all our buildings, cutting emissions and fuel bills and ending fuel poverty, with free retrofits for low-income homes. There was a recent report by the Scottish Government that showed there will be about 1 million tonnes of problematic waste in 2021, even if current recycling and waste prevention targets are met. However, when sensible policies are implemented, it is possible to change our waste culture. We all know about the charge for plastic bags and how that massively reduced their use. The same would work for things like single-use coffee cups, and we did push the Scottish Government to adopt this. But the Scottish Government has so far failed to capture the potential for the renewable industry in Scotland. Basically, if we don't make the equipment here, we lose the green jobs to overseas. We need to see oil and gas decommissioning work going to Scottish companies, and we need to invest in skills training to ensure Scottish workers can access the new green jobs. Liberal Democrats have a radical and credible plan to tackle the climate emergency effectively and make the UK the world leader it should be in those fields. Scotland can show the way for the rest of the UK, but there is more to meeting targets than just setting them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Katie, and thoughts from Scottish Lib Dem Party. So we have heard from all 5 of our major political parties' representatives, and some wonderful ideas and some action planning there. We've also heard from Mathis and Terry about what Global Footprint Network is doing and what SEPA's innovative plans are to move the dial here. Now, in a few moments, we will go to audience questions. And now we will do, before that, I would like to have a chair's prerogative and ask a couple of questions of my own that's been going through the mind. And then some great questions coming through, and the poll is live, and some of the questions and audience responses are very telling and very, very one-sided in some cases, and some of them the thoughts are divided. So again, I welcome you all. Thank you for your contributions and thoughts. And while you all put forward a lot of wonderful ideas, I would say one of the theme that was running through in Scotland and around the world, what we are seeing increasingly on climate crisis and leadership for sustainability. My question to the panel is that what is the role of leadership in terms of from the government, business, public partners, and communities point of view? Where do you see these various roles for the various people in leadership, and who is doing it better in your example? So if I could start with you, Gillian, and then I will go to one by one and look forward to that.
The second part of your question about who's doing it better, I think I'm going to need more time to think about it. But I agree that the public sector and has to show leadership, right? And even though perhaps even something like the Scottish Parliament didn't employ an awful lot of people, doesn't have a massive carbon footprint in the way that, say, a big industrial enterprise would do, showing leadership means you're not a hypocrite. You know, you're setting up, you're showing the examples and how it can be done. I think one of the problems we've got is what I would come back to what I was saying. There's people seem to be set in old ways of doing things, and things that are actually quite good for the planet and good for well-being, like Mark was talking about well-being, something like agile working, remote working, flexible working, which I've been banging on about my whole working life, is good for the planet, it's good for your well-being, but we still have this situation where employers have a mistrust of their employees. We've seen it's worked. We've seen it's worked because it had to work. A lot of us have been saying. So all the things about how we work, we need to embed them in the future and start trusting people more, because how we work and how we organise ourselves is going to reduce our carbon footprint. And I'd like to be able to say, oh, I know that X company is better at it than everyone else. I think everyone has to be better at it. And we have to actually, again, look at everything we do in our ordinary practice. Do we need to physically go somewhere in order to make decisions and to get work done? You know, if we didn't have, and as Colin said, if we didn't have people sitting in their cars every day just to get to a location when that work can be done from their home with assistance from that company, then we would be eradicating quite a lot of the particles that we put in to the air every morning and every evening. So that's just one thing. And I'm really worried about that slipping back, actually. It can't happen.
Yeah, thank you, Gillian. Maurice, would you like to add some to that, the role of leadership and collaborative aspects of government and businesses on that?
Yeah, I think, leadership's incredibly important, but it's also about utilizing that in the correct manner. So, I've been in politics for 4 years, and I'm so surprised at the way that politicians and government in general looks to interfere rather than intervene. And the sense is that if there's an issue with, on climate change, or there's a failure to meet a recycling target or an active travel target, the solution from politicians is often to set up a task force or set up a commission or bring experts together, when actually we need action to happen. We need to let Zero Waste Scotland and SEPA go out there and do their stuff and support them and trust them to do the job, to work with business, to be on the coalface. And I think that's absolutely critical. On the flip side, there's a massive role for politicians and government to intervene helpfully. For example, on plastics, I'd love to see a plastic recycling plant built here in Scotland, yet in the whole of Scotland, all the plastic that's put for recycling, only 2% recycled here in Scotland. So that's one way in which building a plastic recycling facility, we would be doing a lot better just on that one aspect. And there is a role for government to intervene. There's some great examples across Europe. Before I started in this role, I looked at the application of the circular economy in Denmark and in the Netherlands and in Finland. And no one's doing it perfectly. Scotland's leading in some aspects, as are other nations. And I think sharing that best practice is one way in which we can improve the lip in terms of tackling climate change.
Okay, Colin, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks very much, Dr. Malik. I mean, I think it needs to be a partnership of individuals in the choices we make, a partnership of politicians in the policy initiatives that we put forward, a partnership of agencies when it comes to delivering those policies, and a partnership of organisations and branches on what they do on the ground every day in order to make that happen. And I want to pick up on a point that Gillian made, and it's something I feel really passionate about, and that's the issue of home working. I represent a big rural area in the south of Scotland, and every day thousands of my constituents are told to drive or get a train or a bus into the centre of Edinburgh or Glasgow for employment, because that's where we drive the jobs towards, our most congested areas. Often they sit in an office that frankly they could be sitting anywhere. They don't have to be in that office in the centre of some of our most congested streets in Edinburgh. They could be working from home. And we've seen that happen. And what I have a real fear is that as we move out of lockdown, that we begin to lose that we go back to a culture that continues to say the way to assess workers is to make sure they're sitting at their desk in a city centre office, 9 o'clock to 5, Monday to Friday. And we have to stop that happening. And we have to enable people, both for the environmental benefits, the business benefits, the quality of life benefits, to get away from that particular model. And I'll just give you one policy intervention I would make in order to help that happen. If I wanted to buy a season ticket for a train, I would have to get a ticket that would only be value for money if it took me into the centre of Edinburgh 5 days a week. Why don't we have season tickets for trains that give you an incentive to use 2 days a week or 3 days a week, so you make the savings then to enable people to work from home a couple of days a week but still get the benefit of using public transport during the course of the week. A simple intervention like that would reward working from home and rather than penalise it that we have at the moment. But I think enabling home working, I think, is a big challenge and a big test of our commitment to tackling the climate crisis in the months ahead.
Thank you. Let me bring in Mark there. So Mark, your thoughts on leadership of a government and businesses to drive that change?
Yeah, I think leadership can come in many different ways. So, I mean, I think, I was quite excited as a Green that the Scottish Government helped to form the Wellbeing Economies Alliance with New Zealand and Iceland, looking at how we change the purpose of government direction on economic policy. What I've not been so impressed about is then how government hasn't followed through on that. And I've been particularly impressed with New Zealand and the stance that they've taken on oil and gas. I don't think it's compatible in Scotland to have maximum economic recovery of oil and gas leading beyond 2030 and still meet our climate targets. So I think, there are some contradictions there within government, and I would say within the Scottish Government, that need to be worked through. Having said that, my own party's worked in Parliament very constructively with the Scottish Government when it's come to setting budgets. And we've had a very active discussion around climate change and how we use the budget to support young people, particularly through free public transport for under 19s, but also how we invest in our energy efficiency and housing stock, and how we climate-proof spending decisions going forward. So at the moment, I see far too much of government capital spending going on building more roads, which sadly isn't providing an option for Colin's constituents to get to the cities, whereas investment in rail definitely would help to support that and give us all low carbon alternatives. So, we need to sort of take the leadership into how we work in Parliament as well. And certainly for me and my party, kind of working with government to try and get small changes while at the same time challenging the big directions of travel where we think government perhaps isn't getting things right at the moment is important. In terms of the private sector, I think I've been very impressed with what the renewable energy industry has managed to achieve in the last 5 to 10 years. I think getting the cost down on offshore renewables has been incredible. It means that offshore wind is now compatible in terms of price with gas, actually cheaper than gas to produce electricity now, which is incredible. But of course, what business needs in a genuine partnership with government is certainty. And it hasn't helped that the Westminster government has pulled subsidies away from some forms of renewables in recent years because it's removed the certainty. Government then needs to invest in innovation and drive things forward. So I think, we need certainty for private sector. We need good partnerships happening within parliaments and with governments as well.
Yeah, look, all I'll add is that I don't know what's the best, but I'd like to see communities, businesses, others taking charge. Up in Orkney, that's a small community, but there's tremendous innovation on the energy front up there, and it's some of the energy of the future, and people come from around the world to see it. So I think there's all sorts of opportunities. I think we might have lost part of the signal. So perhaps, Katie, do you want to comment on the question that's been posed?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think I can't hear Katie again.
I've definitely got my microphone on. Can you hear me now? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So you asked about the role of leadership and who was doing it best. When I think about it, actually, it may seem an odd choice. I actually think BP is doing very well, and I'm impressed by them. If you think about where they started from, it's all about fossil fuels. But in fact, now what they do is they're using the income they get from oil and gas to transition to renewables. And the growth in their organisation, I know a lot of people who work for them, is not about the fossil fuels. It's about trying to make that transition. So we need to be trying to support companies to make those transitions across. And I think that's where the leadership from government comes in, because government can set the scene, or does set the scene, and government can support the increases in, for example, renewables, wind power, which we supported when we were in government in the UK level, or, for example, electric charging points that we need to grow massively across Scotland if we want to have more people using electric cars, for example. So I think that the government's leadership role is to set the scene, to enable businesses to make those transitions, and then not put barriers in the way of achieving that. But I also think that individuals and communities can set the scene, can show leadership too. And we know that sometimes individuals are well ahead of what happens in government. So, for example, I think about the start of lockdown. I'm not holding myself out as being a remarkable person in this, but I think it's quite common. I made the decision to walk or cycle. As far as possible, that's the transport I was going to use. Yes, okay, I need to use other transport sometimes. But I've had a massive difference in what I use as a result of the changed conditions. And I think we look at things like the changes in sort of what is seen as good behaviour. You know, for example, everybody in the past might have been getting their coffee as they rushed off to work, but now people are much more aware that these single-use coffee cups with their plastics are damaging the oceans. So we've seen transition, but what we need to do is have both businesses and government support that. So I think you can have leadership at all levels. We all need to do our bit. We all need to work together. And probably the most important thing in terms of leadership from political parties is actually to listen and not to be dogmatic and not to be ideological, but to actually listen to what is working and to recognise what does work, to recognise who is doing well and to support that, and then trying to encourage it along.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks very much, Katie. I think there is some fascinating perspectives there. And while I hear all of your thoughts from different angles representing your point of view from different parties, what will be the key to bring it into action will probably be collaborative working across political parties to bring that definite required change. And I'm sure both Mathis and Terry will agree to that point of view, and that is what is appearing from our audience questions. So there's a lot of engagement from audience, some wonderful questions coming through. And while we be moving now to pick up questions from audience, there is just to remind you all that there is a live poll going on, so you can all put forward your views and contribute to our opinions coming on. So moving on to the questions from Chris Myers, there's a question in terms of which you probably will all be aware or familiar with, that rich 10% population uses and contributes to 50% of emissions. So do you think carbon tax or quota will be the way so that who uses more pays more? A quick, short yes and no. Okay, I would start in the same order. Gillian?
I think there's some problems with the carbon tax. I think we have to make sure that we incentivize people to do the right thing. So there's benefits for companies actually doing the right thing in terms of actually reducing their carbon, because what you don't want is people just thinking, well, you know, I can pollute if I pay X amount of money. That doesn't seem right to me. So that's my view on that. I think it's a bit more complicated than that. But yeah, there is an equality and an equity thing there.
Mark? What, carbon tax?
I think what you need is a whole range of different taxes that look at wealth, particularly unearned wealth, such as land, I think resource taxes are part of that. You've also got to be careful to make sure that they're not regressive, that they don't penalise people on the lowest incomes in society. But if designed well, then yes.
Okay, Maurice?
The key is there's a role for taxation, but actually remember that the driving force around all this is changing the way the businesses operate. And by merely taxing them on the same business model isn't going to change. So we really need to look at mechanisms that are going to allow them to develop completely new business models. And I don't think that taxation in itself can do that.
Colin?
I think taxation is an important role to play in a whole line of areas, but it can also you can also reverse that and talk about tax incentives. I mentioned earlier home working. Can we not build the business rate system that actually incentivize businesses to encourage people to work from home as much as they possibly can, rather than being in an office every day? So tax can be used both ways, both as an incentive, but also as a way of making sure people pay their fair share. Importantly, whatever taxation we have has to be based on people's ability to pay.
Absolutely. I'll come back on that business incentive point. I'll just bring in Katie here and then Mathis and Terry, and then come back to the next question.
So I think the polluter pays is a fair principle, but I think Gillian's right that it may have perverse incentives. So, for example, if you fly and you've paid for a flight, you can offset some of that by paying a bit extra in your price of what you pay. But that isn't offsetting the whole of you flying. So, if you've got the money to pay it, you might go, well, okay, I'll pay that and I'll still fly. Road pricing is an area where you really could be seeing a difference, but I don't think that's ever gone down well with voters, and so political parties have shied away from it. So I think you do need to take people with you. There is an argument for some taxation that can both incentivize good behavior, but also to not support bad behavior, but it can have perverse consequences.
Thank you, Katie. Mathis, your thoughts on that? I'm sure Global Footprint Network is itching to say.
No, of course, we need all kinds of tools. There's no silver bullet. But I mean, what I want to say first and foremost from the outside is I'm heartwarmed by the thoughtfulness and the depth of discussion here. I wish every one of you could be my representative. Unfortunately, I cannot vote for you because I live in California. So yes, it's a complex discussion. But I think the main thing is how we talk about things. You talked before about show leadership. And I wonder if that's the good way to frame it, because show leadership that has this noble tone, it's a noble deed. It's about looking good. It's about extra work. But actually, I think we have to recognize we're not here to do a noble deed. We are asking ourselves, how do we not cut off our arm? Cutting not off your arm is not leadership. It's just what we need to do to live well. And so I think that's kind of how we help to show people that this is the best investment we make into our own economy. Because I think generally, less so in Scotland, but I see that around the world, we massively underestimate the enormous economic risk of business as usual. And I think investing in ways how we can operate well and securely, and that's what Scotland, I think the discussion here is showing, that's exactly where we need to be.
Terry, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, just quickly, I think as a few people have said, the range of pricing and other incentives is important. I noticed from the feed in the discussion, Simon Howie, who's one of Scotland's owns and runs one of Scotland's largest food brands, is suggesting, environmental footprint messaging on packaging, etc. So you give consumers choices. So I think no one tax or price will solve things. It's the very careful and thoughtful combination of prices, taxes, incentives, information that will make the biggest difference.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Yeah, climate challenge, which is why it's a complex problem and not a single solution, as you all say, but thinking through, working collaboratively, we can go. And coming to the point that Colin was saying about business's role, there is a question here from Ken Hurd. He's pointing out Brewdog's announcement, one of Scotland's leading company today, that they have announced that they will operate not only carbon neutral, but carbon negative. And the question is that in terms of management financial rewards to incentivize, what does the panel think? That is it a good template for businesses to follow? Because there is a huge role. One part is that business, and then another part is the behavioral adaptation by the public. And I would like panel's thoughts on that. Okay. So, Colin, since you were speaking on that, would you like to come in? And then I think Mathis and Gillian wants to come in as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Malik. The problem is I'll probably give you my last answer as the answer to this question. But I mean, I think what Brewdog are doing is an excellent idea, and I think that we should be incentivising, absolutely should be incentivising businesses to make the right choices. I think we should also be getting the message across that actually it makes good business sense for them to do so. I chair the Scottish Parliament's cross-party group on fair trade, and one of the strongest arguments, as well as the moral argument for fair trade, one of the strongest arguments I put is that it makes good business sense because there is a market out there for businesses and products that make the right ethical choices. And likewise, I think there is a market out there for consumers who want to support and buy from businesses that make the right environmental choices. You know, a lot of businesses are making these decisions because they know it's good for business as well as being good for the environment. And we have to get that message across that, you know, pollution will damage your company as well as damage the environment.
Thank you. So Gillian, so you wanted to come on that?
I'm going to declare a slight interest, not that I'm just a Brewdog consumer, that's not the interest, but they're actually in my constituency, their headquarters. And one of the things that I've been speaking to Brewdog about is actually help them in their challenge, what they want to do with their carbon footprint, is to get a rail line to Ellen so that they actually don't have to use road freight as much. But I think Colin's absolutely right. I remember I spoke in front of the climate strikers in Aberdeen last year. And one of the things that I said to them is that challenge us, challenge the politicians. Now's the time to do that. We're setting our climate targets, but also challenge your all the companies that you're buying from. Vote with your feet. Ask companies what they're doing to reduce their carbon footprint. And when you see companies that are polluters, do not buy their produce. Go elsewhere. You are a very, very strong group. Your future consumers, your current consumers, and you use your influence by what you buy and what you want from your companies. And there's nothing more powerful than that.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Gillian. Maurice and Katie. Maurice, you are on mute. Yeah, okay.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. I think that there's some great example on the beer front of using waste bread and putting that into the formulation of new beer, and there's some great examples out there. We need far more of that to go. And likewise, you can take some of the spent grains in beer production and make it into bread. So there's lots of really interesting business models out there that can go and help. And I think the one thing that we do need consumers to change their behavior. Behavior change is at the heart of this for both businesses and consumers. And the more we can get both of those joined up, working together, then the better we'll be able to do to design a better economy that will help climate change.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I would come to you, Katie, on a slightly different question, and if you can answer this one as well. So a question here from Martin Valenti is, in terms of next year, COP26 is coming to Glasgow, which was here this year. How do you want to portray, and what is Scotland's one action you would suggest, and how can we put ourselves on the world stage in this area with innovation?
Okay, I actually think it's about warm homes. I think it's something we can do straightforwardly, we can do it quickly, and we have a big challenge in relation to our warm homes. It's not just about building new homes, which is what is talked about. It's about retrofitting. There's a lot of jobs in retrofitting. There is a way of, it's not easy to do, but it's something that both could support making radical changes, bring people with us, create the jobs, and is one of those areas which could have so many different impacts and show that lead the way. But just to come back to the question about Brewdog, I'm just thinking about the fact corporate social responsibility, CSR, has been a thing that companies do and are proud of and have gone further and further and further over the years. Why can't we introduce a corporate environmental responsibility as well? I mean, Brewdog's leading away here and has done a good thing, but if we could make it as normal as CSR has become, no major company operates without CSR. If corporate environmental responsibility became of a similar standing, I think that means it's almost like it creates a virtuous circle. And when you're looking at other companies, your competitors, you know that it's something that you also have to do.
Thank you. Mathis, do you want to add something to here, or shall I go to the poll and then I will come back to you for your summation?
We can do whatever you prefer.
Okay, I'll just run the poll because it's quite interesting. So there is a poll running, and the first question was: is Scotland moving fast enough to challenge global climate change? And it is interesting to see, while we have been focusing, and there is some exciting and innovative suggestions coming through. I think the audience polls, 79% thinks we are not fast enough. So something dramatically need to turn on its head from the political parties, from businesses, from public, and from agencies. Only 21% think we are fast enough. So obviously, despite the current challenge, I think we need to up our game. The other question was, is global lockdown an opportunity to reassess and restart our economy more sustainably? I would say no surprises there. 99% people think that it has given us a kick in the, if I were to use the word, in the backside to say, yeah, let's wake up, call for us, and make up that green economy. And while the health and well-being of our planet and our people is important, and rethink how we generate that economy and what does green economy really means. Another question was, who has greatest influence on climate change in Scotland? And this is an interesting divided opinion. I would say exactly 30% in all, because government and their agencies, people believe, 36% people believe that government and their agencies have a role to play. 34% people think that businesses adopting more sustainable practice have the greatest influence. And people's behavior was a major thing. We were saying that you can put out as many policies and as many practices unless the adoption happens and people actually take on them. So rightly so, 30% of our audience believe that people behaving more sustainably will have the greatest influence. So it actually is a perfect triangle in terms of everybody having a equal role in working together and bringing this climate agenda to actually adoptable solutions. And the business and their responsibility we were talking about. So from the skills agenda that we were talking, from the employees, and a lot of trust questions came in from home working point of view. Would a company's commitment to social and sustainability issues influence your opinion of them, both as a consumer, as a buyer, as an employee, as a user? 99% believe yes. If the companies actually are being socially conscious, environmentally sustainable, it would influence, and that probably points to what the discussion we were having is, that all the businesses need to have that environmental responsibility, and as a result, people will buy more and use them more sustainably. So I think it was a very interesting point, and we could, I suppose, go on here whole night. Sadly, time is coming to an end. COP26 is coming next year. So one final minute from all of you. I would like to say, please just give me your final thoughts. What's your message to the world for COP26 and highlighting Scotland? I will start in the reverse order. Katie, what is your summing thoughts for tonight?
So it's been really interesting to hear what everyone's been saying. And I do think that COVID-19 has really raised awareness and given us all time to reflect on changes. We've seen that with cleaner air, fewer cars around, that these things can happen very suddenly, and governments can make quick changes, and we can all change our behaviour. So I know we've gone back in a way to what it was like before pandemic, before lockdown in some respects, in terms of the increase in pollution that's been seen as we've started to open up the economy again and open up society. What it has shown all of us is what can be done. And I think it gives a lot of hope as to how we can change. Government needs to take leadership, businesses need to take leadership, but we as people can make that difference too.
Thank you. Mark, your thoughts, last 30 seconds.
Look, I think, it's great what Brewdog are doing and some of the smaller initiatives that companies can do, but I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that only those scale of incentives and initiatives can actually deliver the change that's needed. We do need to get to grips with some really big questions. Where is government putting its money into in terms of infrastructure? Are we investing in transport in the right places rather than the wrong places? And I think in particular, the future of industries like oil and gas, nobody tonight's really got to grips with that as a question. And I think it's not going away. And if there was one hope that I would have for COP26 would be that the Scottish Government would come with an action plan for transitioning the oil and gas industry to give it a different future and a brighter future, but not on the current trajectory which we're in, which will result in absolute climate breakdown.
Thank you. On that thought of renewable energy agenda where we are strong. Yes, Colin, your thoughts on that for 30 seconds.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dr. Malik, and thank you again to SEPA and the Global Footprint Network for tonight's event. I think Earth Overshoot Day is a perfect illustration of the scale of the challenge we face and the level of change that is needed. The key point I would highlight, though, is that we can't allow our environment and our economy to be seen as conflicting or competing priorities. The way to build that fairer, better economy is through a new Green Deal that puts environmental justice absolutely at the centre. They're about supporting each other, the environment and the economy, not about conflicting against each other. And the final point I would say, Mathis said he couldn't vote for us because he lives in California. Well, I'm tempted to say, Mathis, I'll come and canvass you and the wonderful sunshine you have, but maybe that'll impact too much on my carbon footprint.
Thank you. Maurice, your thoughts, final thoughts on Scotland's COP26 position and tonight's message.
I thought the polls were really interesting. I'm still trying to work out who the 21% that thought we were doing as well as we are. I found that quite astounding. I thought we should have been 99% people thinking we're not doing enough, because we're not. But I'd love to see over the course of the next year a circular economy design academy built here in Scotland, which would not just look at product design, but also look at system design, bringing our best artists and engineers and creative individuals around. I would also like to see some infrastructure projects, plastics recycling plant, an electric arc furnace that uses surplus wind energy in order to recycle steel, as well as all our new deposit return system vending machines built here in Scotland as well. And I think we can achieve that in the next 9 months, and I'd love to see that by COP26.
Thank you, Maurice. Your thoughts, Gillian?
I guess my one thought that I really want to get across, I haven't had a chance to, is I think we should be throwing the kitchen sink at hydrogen. we are pushing at an open door in terms of what we can do with exporting hydrogen. I think it's the key to what Mark's talking about. We've got the skills, we've got the expertise, we know the technology is there, we just need to get behind it, and the government needs to help incentivise that move and that innovation. But in terms of like final message, as I want to just remind everyone, Scotland is a very diverse place, and that no one can be left behind, and everyone must have their opportunity to play their part in reducing their climate footprint, regardless of whether they live in our islands, in our rural communities. And if we always have to remember that all the policy that we put in place must work in central Glasgow, as well as Shetland, Orkney, the islands, and the sort of places that I represent in the rural areas. If we don't do that, we won't bring the whole country with us.
Thank you. And Mathis, your thoughts, what are your takeaways from today's event?
Thank you so much. What an awesome panel. I'm really thrilled. And I also like that Katie, she mentioned retrofit, because indeed the way we prepare our infrastructure determines how we'll be able to live. And it's a double risk. If we have the wrong infrastructure, we're going to lose value. And not only will we lose value, we'll lose value at the worst time when the economy is frail. So getting the infrastructure right, and much of the infrastructure is already built that needs to be retrofitted, is really, really core. We just did actually a little ebook that I would like to recommend to you with Schneider Electric, a large international company, to really address the question you had before about what can companies do. And we came to the insight collectively that it's a core strategy question for each business to ask themselves, are our products and services enabling humanity, or in this case, Scotland, to succeed? Because if it does, it's like playing soccer downhill. It makes it much easier. If your products and services are not needed for humanity's success, you're planning for your own obsolescence. So I think that's what people also said, the business case and sustainability are far more intertwined than we typically give credit to. And that's also, for me, the greatest opportunity.
Thank you, Mathis. And Terry, final word from you before I conclude today's event.
So if we're going to get from the 22nd of August to the 31st of December, one planet prosperity, everything we do has to change at scale. So I think it would be great if we got to COP26 and we could line up as many organisations, whether they're public, private, third sector, as possible in Scotland, because we have to change the whole system, and say that we've at least done one thing that is really business as unusual and has surprised ourselves and surprised someone else. If we could show that to the world, that we had thousands of organisations in Scotland who did that in the year running up to COP, we could show you can change the systems that our economies and societies are built on.
Thank you all. I think for all the audience who are participating and engaging from home, from various places, your contribution has been wonderful. You've listened to a variety of thoughts, and sitting there, you must be thinking, it can be overwhelming to think that parties do this, businesses do this, and public sector does this. But what is our personal responsibility? I think for everything to work, it is the collective responsibility of us as citizens, whether we are employees, employers, or political parties. The truth is that if each one of us can take that single step or can take that plan, how we reduce our impact on planet, I think we will be moving towards that 31st of December that Mathis is talking about. So I think sadly we could, time has come to an end, and I would now have to thank you all for joining tonight. And otherwise, it is such an engaging discussion, and there are so many points and so many roles and amazing questions from audience that we could probably go on overnight here. But we just have to wrap up, and maybe this is a cue to Terry to hold another series of events in there. As I said, tonight's event itself was a series of third and last for this series by Scottish Environment Protection Agency and Global Footprint Network to mark the Earth Overshoot Day and move the date. But I'm sure we'll, in the run-up to COP26, we'll see much more, and it is only the beginning. So that leaves me to thank all my guests tonight. So thank you, Gillian. Thank you, Maurice. Colin, Mark, and Katie. And thanks, Mathis, and thank you, Terry. It has been a wonderfully engaging discussion, and we are only scratching the surface and beginning to think about how we get our act together and joining. I think one message, if I could take from tonight, it is collaborative working, because while we are independent individuals from different political view, we cannot shift the dial, we cannot move the needle unless we work. Our plan of action might be different, but goal is same. So we need to work together, and it is the same for third sector, public sector, private sector, as well as government organization, all the leadership. I'm sure working from the point of view of Scottish enterprise and skills development, there is a great harmony and there is a will to do, and all we need to do is that bring together on the single platform. So for the audience and from the Global Footprint Network, if you want to see how's your own impact, go to the website and you can see the tool and measure your own assessment. Tonight's event will be available and you can watch it again on the SEPA website. And thank you again for joining tonight. And remember to take your own pledge to move the date and join us in the organization and get it going. If I were to join, my kids would get it trending on the social media. Move the date, take the pledge, and join. Thank you once again. Bye-bye.